Hello, Blazers. You're listening to UAB Green and Told. Here we celebrate the voices and journeys that make UAB extraordinary. Welcome to episode 174 of UAB Green and Told, originally released Monday, April 20th, 2026. Want to catch up on past episodes of UAB's most listened to podcast? Visit alumni.uab.edu/greenandtold or find us on Spotify and the Apple Podcast app. And while you're there, leave a written review so more Blazers can discover us. I'm Greg Berry, a UAB alum and Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Some careers start with a calling. Bill Somerall's began with a concert. One moment he's tuning an oboe in a practice room. The next he's surrounded by musicians casually carrying MCAT handbooks like they're part of the score. But for today's guest, the path from performance halls to patient halls wasn't a straight line. When the curtain rose on medical school, he realized the music had changed tempo, and that tempo shift set the stage for a much harder movement than he expected.
I'd had the basics, but it was a struggle in that I had a lot of catching up to do. But at the end of the day, I did well.
Years later, as his OB-GYN career matured, he felt a familiar restlessness, like a musician sensing the end of a set. And as he'll share, that's when he needed someone to nudge him toward the next stage.
I was getting older and night call was getting harder and harder and harder. And my wife, Deanne, who you know really well, was teaching at the School of Nursing. And she said, if you're frustrated with what's going on, do something about it.
That something led him back to where his story began. Not the clinic, but the classroom. And what he found there surprised even him.
It was perhaps one of the greatest professional years of my life. Working with those kids, they were sponges.
Somewhere between Aniana's quiet mornings and Montgomery's bustling school days, Bill Somerall was a young musician starting to piece together a life that didn't follow the standard score. While he eventually became an OB-GYN, back then his world revolved around reads, rehearsals, and the breath work of woodwinds. From the echo of practice rooms to the intensity of night call, his journey hits notes that feel both familiar and completely original, his path shifting in the most unexpected ways.
Went to a music festival up in Swanee, Tennessee, the Swanee Summer Music Festival. And while I was there were all of these people walking around with MCAT handbooks under their arms. And, I'm thinking, orchestra here, string players, MCAT handbook, brass players, MCAT handbook. And so I had a conversation with a woman who was on faculty there. She was one of the percussionists with the Dallas Symphony. And I said, what's going on with all of these people walking around with MCAT handbooks? And she said, the competition for jobs is just so incredible. I mean, for a violin audition, there'll be 300 applicants for one position. And then for a flute application for someplace, there are 300 applications, and then they'll narrow it down to one. So these people are walking around trying to develop some sort of job security in case the music business doesn't work out. When I first started Auburn, I was a chemical engineering major. So my first year, I had a lot of my science background, chemistry, math, and that sort of stuff. But I'd had a teacher at Auburn. Her name was Lillian Pancari, and she sat on the Medical Dental Advisory Committee. They were the committee that would write the recommendations for students who were going to medical or dental school. So I had a conversation with her and told her what my experience had been at Swanee and what my concerns were, because in some ways I had some ethical issues of, I'm being trained as an oboist who wants to be a performer, but yet the jobs are so limited. And, what am I going to do? Go to a college and teach someplace where I know that my students could be excellent players, but probably would have a very difficult time getting a job. She said, well, music will always be there. So if you don't explore this for the rest of your life, you're going to ask yourself, well, what if? Probably the most difficult conversation I thought I was going to have was with my oboe teacher, because, here I've spent this time with him, and now I'm thinking about going to medical school. So walked in and I sat down and sort of this long, pregnant pause, and he looked at me and said, "Something's bothering you, isn't it?" I said, "Well, yes, sir." He said, "After my experience at Swanee and doing some other exploration, I think I want to finish my degree, but I think I want to go to medical school." And, he put his hands on his head like this and leaned back, and there was this minute and a half bit of silence, and I thought, oh my gosh, what's he thinking? What's he going to come back with? And after that long pause, he looked at me and he said, "I always wanted to go to dental school."
No
He
kidding.
said, "So I will support what you're thinking about doing." So that 5th year at Auburn, I picked up all the rest of my prerequisites, and with conversations with other people, went through the process and got into school.
We're going to come back to music later on, as well as you brought up pregnant. We're going to touch on that as well. For most people, medicine's not a fallback, but for musicians, it is. I mean, that's just crazy to fathom.
Well, in my class, there were 4 degreed musicians. There was a woman who had gone to the Curtis Institute, which is probably the highest powered conservatory in the United States. And then another classmate had played with the Baltimore Symphony for a number of years and then came back to Birmingham. He was from Birmingham, went to UAB, got his prereqs, and then applied to medical school and got in. And the other was a singer. And we formed a little trio while we were in school too.
You arrived at UAB as a student late 70s. Campus back then wasn't like it is today at all. What was it like?
Well, at the time, Denman Hall, which has just been destroyed and removed from campus, was the only dorm on campus. Where the University Green is, 15th Street used to run straight through there down to 8th Avenue. And on the east side of 15th Street and 8th Avenue, now University Boulevard, was what was referred to as the compound. This was a group of student housing, mostly for married students, and there was a chain link fence around it with barbed wire on top of that. The UAB bookstore was across the street. The Hill Center, as we know it now, was not there. Even the first Hill Center was not there. The only buildings on the west side of campus really were the numbered buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4. Children's Hospital was tiny, too, at that point.
Sure.
I remember when I was getting ready to leave to go to Cincinnati to do my internship, they had drawn out the outline of what was that triangular portion of the hospital facing 7th Avenue that sort of looked like the east wing of the National Gallery of Art.
When you got to town to start taking those classes in 1977, were you ready? Did you think you were ready?
I thought I was. I knew I would have some challenges because, there were 165 people in my class. Most of the people in there, of that 165, probably 120 were science majors, chemistry, biology, that sort of thing. And I'd had the basics, but it was a struggle in that I had a lot of catching up to do. But at the end of the day, I did well. I remember there was a time in gross anatomy that I wanted to quit because we were studying head and neck, and the gross anatomy for that was extremely complicated. I was in the gross lab one night, and a person who actually became my best friend in medical school was there. And he recognized something was wrong. And I told him that I'd actually thought I was going to quit medical school and maybe try to go to pharmacy school. And he talked me off the wall, and we studied together, and we worked and we worked and we worked. And to this day, I still remember the only question I missed on the practical. And so, ended up thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do this, to making a 99 on the practical. And but then after that, it was just sort of like, I don't know, this weight lifted, and things just became, I won't say easier, but much more accessible to me.
Did you find that being a musician helped just because of the way that you played the instrument, the dexterity?
there are lots of things that go on. You're always analyzing things. You're always trying to put things together in categories, and you're grouping things together when you're looking at a musical line and how that goes. And then there's the ethic of you do the work that you have to do to get the result that you want at the end of the day. And so a lot of that does apply to, I think, higher level graduate work, whether it's medicine or physics or chemistry or, the humanities at all. So I think that there are a lot of traits that carry over. And if you look in the big professional music world, there are a lot of really famous musicians who went to medical school first and then decided to pursue their career in medicine later.
You found your way into obstetrics and gynecology. Why that route?
Well, again, it wasn't my original
There's a theme.
original goal. I think you'll look at my life. I was watching a video the other day talking about career trajectories, and they said, you've got that linear one where you're sort of taking one step at the time and you eventually get to this place. Then another one is where you're driving down the interstate and you get to an exit and you go, well, I think I'll go in this direction. And then there's that point where you slam on the brakes and the car slides around and you go someplace that you just have absolutely no idea where you're going. I mentioned that I had done my internship in Cincinnati at Children's Hospital. So I did my internship in pediatrics. But what had happened during medical school was that on the OB-GYN rotation, Charlie Flowers, who was the chairman of the department at that time, was only given 8 weeks for the rotation, whereas all of the other rotations, what we call the Big Five, had been given 10 weeks. And he said that he wouldn't take students into OB until they'd had medicine and surgery because he didn't want to have to teach them how to do histories and physicals because the time span was so short.
Sure.
So I went to Cincinnati and did my internship there, and it was a great year, but I knew that I was coming back someplace. And so during that year, I interviewed at different places and was able to come back to UAB and do my OB residency here. At the time, I'd gotten married and we had had children, and I thought, well, I need to go into practice and support my family. So the fellowship sort of went by the wayside, but then over the next 27 years, practiced OB-GYN here in Birmingham.
Did you keep playing music over that time? I assume you did.
I did, and not always playing, but I was actively involved. I sang in the choir at Independent Presbyterian Church for 21 years, and that was probably one of the best musical experiences of my life because Joe Schreiber, who was the organist choir master there, was just a wonderful musician. The choir was a group of people who were very dedicated, and with that group, we sang at the American Guild of Organists convention in Detroit. We sang in Notre Dame in Paris. We sang in Germany. We sang in France. So it was just a great experience and wonderful people that made a great impact on my life. But toward the end of my career in medicine as an obstetrician, things were changing, insurance reimbursement, electronic medical records, just a lot of frustration. I was getting older and night call was getting harder and harder and harder. And my wife, Deanne, who you know really well, was teaching at the School of Nursing, and she said, if you're frustrated with what's going on, do something about it. So at that point, because of the way things were at the time, she was teaching at UAB, and spouses could go to graduate school for free. So I took 3 years to do a 5th-year master's in music education. And so it took me 3 years to do it because I was still having to work full-time. But when it was time to student teach, the state requires that it's first bell to last bell every day for 12 or 14 weeks. So I'd given up OB at the end of 2012, and then at the end of 2013 retired from OB-GYN so that I could student teach. And so in April of 2014, I got my master's in music education.
You gave up being a doctor, practicing as an OB-GYN to student teach. Now, yes, you retired in there, so I got to give you credit for that, but that had to have been a shift for you.
Well, that's that big swerve of the road.
Yeah.
But I will have to say it was a wonderful experience. And when I got my degree, this was sort of one of the disappointing things. I applied for every available music position within 50 miles of Birmingham that was opening at that time. Got plenty of interviews, but no job offers. And it was sort of discouraging. And a friend of mine, Bill Harper, was a middle school principal. His wife was Dodie Harper, who was the dean of the School of Nursing at that point. And so we were having some conversations, and he said to me, it's not that you're not qualified. He said, they're afraid of you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there is not a principal out there who wants to take someone who is as old as you are, with as much experience as you are, who can think for themselves, when they can hire somebody who's young and mold them into the person that they want them to be. That being said, one of the schools where I had done my middle school student teaching, the middle school band director and I became good friends, and she said, we could use somebody part-time. Of course, the system is not going to know about you, but the band parents are going to pay for you. That academic year, 2014 into 2015, I was an assistant middle school band director, working 3 days a week. And Deanne said she saw less of me while I was doing that work than when I was practicing OB-GYN. But it was perhaps one of the greatest professional years of my life. Working with those kids, they were sponges, and they wanted to play, and this was a very high-performing musical group at this particular school, and they wanted to do well. And so I was teaching individual lessons during the day at school. We would stay after school and do individual lessons. And my responsibility, which was a little out of my ballpark, was to take care of the jazz band. And so we would meet at 7 o'clock on Wednesday mornings. That was an early day. And the kids would show up and they would respond. And I still occasionally, even just for that 1 year, I still occasionally hear from a kid or see a student that I'd had who recognizes me, and we have a conversation and go from there. There was a small group that actually, they called me Dr. So. That's what they call me. So there was a group of kids who eventually put together their own rock band. And I got a letter from one of the students asking if they could have permission to name their band Dr. So. So if you go on YouTube, you can search Dr. So, and they have about 4 or 5 songs that they have on YouTube. I don't think they went very far, but it was nice to be remembered in that regard.
How many different instruments do you play?
I play the saxophone, but my major instrument is the oboe, and then I play the piano. And I have a working knowledge and can sort of doodle around with a clarinet and flute.
That's still the one you gravitate to today?
I go to oboe camp every summer.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I still do some playing around town, church jobs that need an oboe for whatever music that they're doing. So it's satisfying. I don't get to play as much as I really like.
What songs are on your playlist right now at the top that are getting the most listens?
Well, it's going to be mostly in the classical genre. Really, any of the music by Beethoven, the symphonies, the Mozart wind concertos, the Mozart Grand Partita.
So as somebody that gravitates towards classical music, I might not be getting the term right, but how many gigs do you play a year?
Oh, maybe 3 to 5.
Okay.
And some are what I would call, well, they're all meaningful jobs, because I do some church playing and for whatever cantata they might be doing or whatever sacred work that they might be doing.
So Deanne kind of pushed you towards getting that master's, going back to school and getting that degree. You wound up coming back to UAB, and now you're working closely with her.
Well, the story behind that, and we always tell this story, was that after the job at the middle school sort of went out, one morning she left for work, and I'm sitting at the counter in the kitchen watching YouTube videos in my underwear. And she comes home about 6:30, 6:45. I'm sitting at the counter in the kitchen watching YouTube videos in my underwear. And when she walks in and she says, "This is true, I think it probably is," I turned around to her and said, "Sweetheart, I think I could land an airplane." And she said, "You've got to get a job." So she, in passing, mentioned something to Linda Moneyham, who's the senior associate dean for academic affairs. And so mentioned something to Dean Harper, and they were all on board with me coming in. So I came in, first of all, even that year while I was teaching, I went in as an adjunct where I really was just grading papers in a course or two. And then when I was available full time, they brought me in as a 0.8. And after a year or so, they said, "Why don't you apply for this position that is coming open?" So went through the interview process, gave the official formal presentation that all full-time faculty members have to go through. And so in January of 2016, I was hired on as an assistant professor of nursing.
What's it like working with your wife? Because I'm sure she's just down the hall.
Well, actually, we don't see each other that much because we're quite removed from what we do. I teach and manage two big courses for the graduate nursing students, pathophysiology and pharmacology, and she's doing her thing with the leadership and health policy fellows. So while we're at the school, we really don't interact that much. We see each other at meetings and we sit with each other at meetings and that sort of thing. She gets there in the morning and goes to her office. I get there in the morning. We sometimes ride in together depending on what our schedules are. I go to my office. We might see each other at lunch, and then it's back to our own domains and doing what we do, and then we come home.
Your family has seemingly millions of UAB degrees. What is it that has made you and Deanne want to just keep giving back and back?
Well, I think UAB has given us a lot. So it's important, I think, for us to help promote what we've done and scholarships for nurses, support for those who are in need of the availability of money to go to school. So we just think it's important. And as a physician, I can tell you, nurses are the backbone of what's going on in terms of healthcare in the hospital. I always tell nurses, particularly those in the programs that I teach in, that you're going to know more about the patient because you're with that patient all day than the intern, the resident, and even the attending physician, because they know when the changes are taking place. They're the ones who call, say, "I'm concerned about this patient. I think something needs to be done. Can you come and see this patient now?" And I remember even from my practice, when I was practicing OB-GYN, the nurses in labor and delivery were women that you trusted and you understood that they knew what they were doing. And when they called and said, "I really need you to come and see this patient now," you knew that something was going on. They had seen something that had changed. And so that frontline component of nursing care is really the backbone of what I think great healthcare comes from.
When you made the transition to go from music into medicine, did you ever think you'd come back and get a degree in music?
Not really. I was playing some. There was just enough to sort of keep that fire burning in the back. Even while I was practicing, I had my kids went through school and they were in the band, and so I got to know the band directors very well. And so, because of my saxophone background, because of my oboe background, I would go on those days that I was off, or early in the morning before I would go to the office. I would go to the high school and work with one of the oboe students for 30 minutes, or during band camp, I would work with the saxophone section, trying to get them going. So I was doing some teaching, and it was all music related, but I never really ever thought that, that would be something that I would go back and do full time or try to do full time.
That's Bill Somerall. He earned his Doctor of Medicine from the Heersink School of Medicine in 1981 before completing his residency in 1986. He later added a master's in education from the School of Education and Human Sciences in 2014. Today, he's an assistant professor in the UAB School of Nursing, and from orchestras to operating rooms to inspiring the next generation, his story sets up a perfect moment to share what it means to be a blazer.
I think being a blazer is a special circumstance because you're here as a student because of what we have to offer. We have things that the University of XYZ can't offer students. And when you look at where we are as an academic medical center, we have things to offer students. So to be a blazer, I think, is to be someone who is, what I have seen, very goal-oriented, very passionate about the learning, and I think there's a great focus. I don't know if I'm saying this very eloquently or not, but I think there's just a spirit that comes from the environment where we are. We're an urban school, so our focus is different. We have all of the peripherals. We've got basketball, we've got football, volleyball, that sort of thing. But we also have world-class academics. Yes, we're an academic center for medicine, but we have got great humanities. We've got great science on there for engineering, and you name it. We've just about got it all.
That's it for this episode of UAB Green and Told. Want to hear more inspiring stories? Head to alumni.uab.edu/green and told, or find us on Spotify and the Apple Podcast app. Know someone with a great story? Send your suggestions to greenandtold@uab.edu. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay connected with the Blazers. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Blazers.